Olá, sejam bem-vindos a mais um vídeo da nossa cobertura especial do IT Forum Praia do Forte 2025. Eu sou o Rafael Homer, sou editor do IT Forum. Tenho um convidado aqui muito especial para esse episódio, Gary Bolles, que é especialista em inteligência artificial, autor e também parceiro da Singularity University. A gente vai conversar um pouco sobre os temas que ele trouxe na keynote de abertura dele no evento que aconteceu nessa sexta-feira. Agora eu vou trocar para inglês. Gary, thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I've been having a great time at IT Forum.
That's great to hear. And in this conversation, I wanted to tell everyone who didn't get a chance to watch your presentation you did earlier today a bit about the messages you brought. And something I found very interesting, you said, it was actually something that came up at the very end of your presentation, a question someone asked you about AGI. And I want to start off from there. So you said that, in your opinion, AGI, it's a marketing scam, pretty much, right? And that God, and I think that's very interesting. So what's your vision around AGI? And more important, what this vision implies for CIOs?
One of the things I was trying to get across this morning was to talk about my background, more than 40 years in technology in Silicon Valley. And so I think that gives me a little bit of perspective about some of the waves of technology. And so I know Silicon Valley hype waves when I see them. I've been part of them before. And so I think it's very important to just understand what we mean when we talk about different technologies. So artificial general intelligence, it plays off of artificial intelligence. And I was saying, well, so first off, AI itself is a marketing term. There's no clear definition. It's just a basket of technologies, one of which is generative AI, one of which is large language models. And so it ends up being like these really fuzzy categories. So there's no really clear idea as to what it means. But instead, what the terms are intended to communicate is that these are breakthrough technologies and you have a fear of missing out because you're not implementing them. And then AGI, I actually have a newsletter in LinkedIn where I've said it's a false god, because it's talked about as like this next coming of this tremendous capacity that's going to be created like by these godlike technologists in Silicon Valley, and it's going to be able to do everything that a human can do. And that's also really fuzzy. I mean, what does that mean? And it really isn't very likely that that's the way it's going to work. There won't be one company coming up with one piece of software that is able to do so many different things. We'll just give up. Like, okay, great. No human can ever compete with that piece of software. Because instead, if you think of this basket of technologies and a range of different capacities by each of these different applications, and you add them up, well, yeah, you could automate a whole bunch of human jobs, but they're probably tasks. I mean, they're probably really good at automating these tasks. And it's probably for jobs that have very strong information components. I don't think AGI is going to do much for a plumber. I don't think it's going to do much for an electrician or a person who works in a hotel or a person who works in a restaurant. Just keep on detailing all of these, what are often called frontline workers and frontline work, where it really isn't going to change that much, or it shouldn't change that much in the near term. It's really information-intensive jobs. And so instead, I'd look for, well, how will these technologies get better and better and better in some ways? But it's also important to realize that the code path that we're following has some tremendous limitations. And as we noticed by ChatGPT 5.0 just having been released, it's a big disappointment by a lot of people. It was not this massive leap up the exponential curve. It was actually sort of, a little more of a blip to many people.
In a way, OpenAI trying to look for more efficiency in their models, but
well, more efficiency, but also Mr. Altman has been saying for quite some time that we know the path to AGI. We know how to get there. We know how to create this tremendously all-purpose god of technology, and then they release a version they've been working on for a year and a half, and it's actually quite disappointing to many people. So yes, getting better efficiency, awesome. That's wonderful. But if you hadn't had this hype wave in the first place, you wouldn't be setting these expectations. It's like saying that Microsoft Word is suddenly going to be able to reflect every single thought that any human has ever had. And then they release a new version that has, just a few new features. I mean, we have to be careful about how we set these expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, it's something you also mentioned in the morning is that, and you just mentioned it again now, but I think it's interesting to use the aspect of this technology being a federation of different technologies interacting between themselves, and you need a layer of capabilities to administer that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so it's for IT fans who are of history of IT. So one of the great examples where operating systems and the ways that humans manage the interaction with microprocessors. So in the past, we used to rely on certain vendors for those things. And then we realized, oh no, you could open source an operating system. And along comes a guy named Linus Torvalds, and he comes up with something called Linux. Well, what was the business model for Linux? There wasn't any. It was basically, let's build a community of programmers. And then what we'll enable is an ecosystem of individuals and organizations that are trying to solve problems for different companies, different organizations, and they will keep on adapting the software. But what they had was a structure, a federation guided by Mr. Torvalds to continually bring new developments into the fold so that they could work together. Well, that kind of sounds like the AI moment that we're in, where they're going to continually innovate, lots of different companies. What you want is to be able to continually understand, well, what are the business value I'm trying to create? And especially for IT, what are the business processes I'm trying to empower and enable? And then you're going to start to keep on pulling from these different tools. It's having all the tools to be able to work well together. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's one of the strong deliverables for any person who leads in IT is you have to build off of these layers of strategy, of strategic assets before you can really leverage a lot of the technology assets. Great business strategy, linked to a great AI strategy, linked to a great talent in AI strategy, linked to a great data strategy. You've got to be able to have your arms around your data so you can make all those things work. And if instead you go to try to implement these tools without really knowing your data, having high quality data, having information that's widely accessible to these tools, you're not going to get the value from them.
Absolutely. And Gary, something else you brought during your keynote is a set of sets that companies need to keep interacting with these new technologies. You have mindset, you have a skill set, and you have a tool set. So can you run me through these three ideas, how they interact with each other, the pocket version of what you did earlier today?
Yeah, very, very simple. So mindset, skill set, and tool set I talk about as the three legs of the stool. Yeah. For any kind of transformation or navigating exponential change. It's for us as individuals, it's in teams, it's in organizations, right? So mindset is how we approach problems. Skill set is the capacity to be able to solve problems, and tool set is what enables us to develop, hopefully, the best mindset and skill set for any situation. So with IT, we often want to start with tool set. I have a solution to a problem. I don't even know what the problem is. Well, how well does that go? Not usually too well, right? So instead, if we start with mindset, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and how is it we can understand the ways we can help individuals to be able to continually adapt to new problems? If you have the kinds of processes in your organization that encourage humans to continually develop new mindsets, and especially to have an open mindset. You might call it flexibility. You might call it the ability to be a lifelong learner, to have a growth mindset, whatever that is, that empowers everybody in your organization to want to continually be driving change. Right? So it starts with mindset. So digital transformation is very little about digital and mostly about transformation, especially as individuals. So we start with mindset. But people need skills. They need the capacity to be able to change. We can't just tell them change and walk away. We have to give them the skills. And so that's where we have to help people first understand their own skills. That's why we've been working with Acaso to help build skills-based organizations. They need to have the skills intelligence to be able to understand what kinds of skills they want to have in the future. And then they have to have the process to help people to continually develop skills. And especially as roles change. I would have said a year ago, one of the safest jobs on the planet was a programmer. Mm-hmm. Well, in the era of vibe coding, well, what does that mean? It means probably that you need a different skill set. They need to be more like a business analyst. They need to understand how to review code that has been vibe coded and probably has even more errors in it than a human would have put. And they need to have a completely different mindset about how they're going to help people to understand the problems that they're trying to solve and the ways to apply technology to do that. So this is why mindset, skill set are so critical first as the deliverables for IT. To think about what it's trying to encourage in the humans that will eventually be using the tool set.
Right. And in this scenario you're describing, so what's the key role of the CIO? So they need to empower their own teams to get these tools and use these tools for business transformation, but they also need to lead these people during this transformation. So what's the key roles that these executives need to be in?
So I want to be provocative a little bit.
Sure.
And so I try to encourage people to think of, well, so let's say we just see a possible future. That's the name of my podcast for Singularity University. We see a possible future where these roles that we have developed, these functions that we have developed in organizations are not necessary in their current form.
Right.
No IT, no CIO, no talent or HR organization, and no CHRO. Okay, so at least not those labels and not the way we describe the functions of those in the organization. And what if instead we say, look, we need to have very flexible organizations where we have a flow of human talent. They need to be able to identify the kinds of problems that they need to solve and be continually linking up to those problems. And how will we do that? Well, we need to have great talent development processes, and then we need to have problem-solving technologies and techniques that help them to do their best work. Oh, well, that might be, in some cases, completely separate organizations and a CIO and a CHRO. It might be where they're not seen as independent. People problems want to enable with technology, and technology problems have to be for people solving problems. So Moderna, the big mRNA company, just shifted to where they only have one person as both CIO and CHRO. And so that's one potential way we're going to rethink those as different roles. But the reason I'm suggesting that for current CIOs is not to say your job is going to go away. It's more to think about now, if I were to step back, what is my function in the organization? 30 years ago, it was uptime.
Yep.
That was your job. There wasn't even a CIO. Infrastructure, 99.9% uptime. And the worst thing you could possibly have is that the CEO call you at 2 a.m. and tell you that he couldn't get in or she couldn't get into the mainframe. Now, over time, what has happened is there's no company that would ever think about doing a new business initiative without involving the CIO. I mean, just why? That's crazy. Why would you think about not having it powered by technology? So the CIO has to be one of the best business people on the planet. They've got to really understand and be part of the process of defining the strategy of the organization. They have to be the one that understands the people side of it. So I would suggest just one thought experiment. What if a couple days a year you and the CHRO flip jobs? Just for a day. What would that look like? What would you learn from doing each other's jobs? And now start thinking about how that partnership needs to continually morph, because the people person knows a lot about human motivation and why people do things and their meaning in their work and their skills that they bring to it. And the CIO, the head of IT, knows a lot about the tool set. So that's the first thing I'd suggest as a thought experiment, is how can you continually morph your role to be deeper in the business, but also deeper into the people. And then the other aspect that I was trying to encourage is we think of IT basically as information technologies.
Yep.
That's an important and traditional role because we're using these technologies to help people to manage information. But I'm suggesting in the future that there's another IT. It's innovation techniques. It's using the processes that IT has continually used to hear a problem from the business side and then to want to help develop the solution for the problem by innovating, creating code, iterating. And the process we used to follow was waterfall. Tell me what you need, and I'm going to go away for 18 months, and I'll give you a piece of software that won't meet your business needs today. And that's why IT came up with a practice that is rolled out in other parts of the organization called Agile. I mean, this never happened before in the history of IT. So I push CIOs to continually think about how can you develop and adopt these innovation practices, not just for yourself, but how you can be a catalyst for innovation practices in the organization. That, I think, is the future IT.
That's a very interesting proposition. And I think it's a much more organic approach on the role of the CIO and much more integrated to the business. But at the same time, you mentioned vibe coding, and you mentioned as vibe coding can create a lot of ease of use for the business user to create an application or whatever. But then again, you need to have strong foundation, security foundation, processes foundation to make sure that this application runs in a secure environment, right? So you do have technical challenges that are there and can be aggravated by business users that have access to tools that are very easy to use with no technical skills. So how does that look like in a world where IT needs to be very close to the business, but then again has infrastructure problems that are still there and maybe aggravated by tools that are very available, very easy to use.
One of the lines I always use with CIOs is the same line I use with parents and with CHROs as well, is you didn't choose to be born into this time. I mean, you could have been born in a time where it was just uptime and that was it. Like, that's all you needed to care about. You just got to manage the big iron and everything's good.
Yeah.
Life is good, right? So you didn't choose this time. So what are the things that you have to deal with? And the answer is it's all the above. So you have legacy systems. Can't ignore them. You're going to try to migrate as much as you can. You've got newer systems, and you live in an era of bring your own device. I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you didn't have to deal with these digital distraction devices that we all carry around, and now you've got to integrate all that stuff. You didn't have to deal with this hype wave of, especially many people in the business, having a fear of missing out, FOMO, that if we don't adopt these technologies now, we're going to be behind. And you didn't ask to be born into a time where these programmers that you have trained and developed over years, and you built all of this infrastructure for senior programmers and junior programmers, and it's an onboard path into the organization. You put all that in place, and then suddenly there's this new whack in the side of the head where the technology can actually develop technology. And in addition, one other problem, one of the potential problems you got to deal with is let's say you've got a large organization, 50,000 employees. Do you want 50,000 people developing a new application every day? So you now have 500,000, 5 billion applications you've got to manage. No, I don't think you want that. I've asked the question in my talk, will we love 1 trillion robots? I mean, do you want 1 trillion robots running around in your company? I don't think so. I don't think, that's a sorcerer's apprentice problem. So here's some of the things to be thinking about is you've got all these things that are on your plate, and what's the through line? What are the priorities? So obviously it's the needs of the business. It's the needs of helping to have the humans that you need today and tomorrow to be able to solve problems, to create value for your customers or other constituents. It's the problem of balancing all these different priorities. And what is likely to happen, one of the possible futures, is that the technologies, the artificial intelligence and related technologies, get pretty good at creating an abstraction layer over a lot of those existing systems. So the rationalization process, the migration process, is actually eased because business processes and business stakeholders are interacting at the higher level using natural language. And what is happening under the covers, IT is managing in a portfolio. And there will be some data really easy to access. You're going to have an agent that's going to go scrape a bunch of websites. Done. That wasn't hard. Oh, you've got another one that needs to combine data from a whole bunch of different sources that are highly secure in a highly secure company. And you've got to make sure that you have all of the rights done right, or else you've created a massive security risk for your company. That's the other end of the portfolio, where you've got to have much, much better strategies to be able to manage the process so that you don't create new risk for the organization. So take that portfolio mindset as the CIO, apply it to this range of problems. Think of it as an abstraction layer, potentially, to be able to be sort of a super API, accessing data in a lot of different sources. Now you've got a mindset that you can try to see, would that strategy work for us? And does that help us to be able to understand how we can do this digital transformation much more easily over time, because we don't have to continually update every single application in the system. We can abstract, build a new business process layer that interacts with these technologies, and we don't have to go through all of this recoding and code migration of the existing systems.
Absolutely. And Gary, I think one last thing, and this is something I'm very interested in and want to hear your opinion on it. Are you worried in any way about new developers growing dependent on AI capabilities for coding? These developers not having traditional bits and bytes skills, technical skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to use the sort of grandfather's story. I worked for a startup in Southern California back in the 1980s, where the two lead programmers were also the owners of the company, and they would constantly compete with each other because they were talking machine language to the microprocessor and arguing over who used fewer bits than the other. Okay, so we've created these continually higher level abstractions as we create software tools. And it was inevitable that we were going to keep on moving up another layer where you just weren't going to be banging on a keyboard as much as possible. And of course, we've given up a bunch of skills that we used to require programmers to develop. And as we've moved higher and higher up the stack. There's a tremendous downside to that if what happens is we rely on the tools to do the critical problem-solving steps that we used to do before, and we don't have to listen that much to the business user because we're letting the software tell us in our industry for this particular work role, for this particular problem, here's the 5 steps people need to go through.
Yep.
That's a fail for us because really what we need is that programmer, that coder to become more of that business analyst, more understanding of the business needs, more able to help the user to reflect those in the software that's developed, because the average person's going to suck as a vibe coder. I mean, they're just not going to be able to define the problem that they need to solve. They're not going to be able to figure out all the interconnections with existing data systems. All of that is going to need IT. And so I'm worried about the cognitive loss. I'm worried about the skills loss. But I also think what you're going to be able to do is one of the things IT must do, that the CIO must take on, is why wouldn't you use one of the most insightful business people from a business division to come in and work with you to learn how to do the best possible vibe coding and then go back into her job? Why wouldn't you do that? Because you get this cross-fertilization where your team learns, their team learns. You get these artificial distinctions in the organization start to melt because you've got people that can actually traverse both arenas. And so that, to me, is part of that possible future, is that you have the role as CIO is about enabling innovation throughout the organization, but enabling innovative people.
Absolutely. E eu conversei aqui com o Gary Bolles, especialista em inteligência artificial, autor e também parceiro da Singularity University. Gary, thank you so much for being here with me. It was a pleasure.
No, it's wonderful. Thank you.
A gente vai ficando por aqui e continua acompanhando a nossa cobertura completa do IT Forum Praia do Forte 2025. Até mais!